Those words still echo in my ears, not like a memory, like a scar. My name is Zenobia Washington. I'm 59 years old. And this is the story I kept trapped behind my smile until the silence became heavier than the truth. That night, at my son Orion's wedding reception, his new mother-in-law, Serafina, lifted a bowl of boiling gumbo and threw it directly into my face. The heat hit first. A violent, burning splash across my cheeks, my eyes, my mouth. My neck as spices stung like needles. Thick broth soaked my ivory silk blouse, dripping down my collar like a public execution. But what burned worse than the gumbo was the smile. Serafina stood there, calm, almost pleased, watching me tremble like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. And then she said it again, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "That is what you deserve." The room went silent. Forks froze mid-air. Glasses stopped clinking. Music died like someone cut its throat. People stared at their plates like their food was suddenly fascinating. No one moved, no one spoke, except my son, my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father abandoned us, the boy I built my whole life around, the one person I thought would never betray me. Orion sat at the head table, arms crossed, and in a voice so cold I barely recognized it, he said, "She's right, Mama." The world tilted. And I realized something terrifying. There are betrayals you can survive, and then there are betrayals that change your bones. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for an explanation. I reached for the linen napkin and wiped my face slowly with the last piece of dignity I had left. Then I stood up, back straight, hands steady, even though inside, I was shaking so hard it felt like my soul was cracking. And before I left that building, I did something no one expected. I reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, dialed a number I had saved weeks ago, and said just 3 words. "It is time." Then I hung up, walked out, closed the ballroom door softly behind me. No one followed. No one called my name. And as I drove through Buckhead under the glittering streetlights, toward my quiet West End apartment, the only question spinning in my head was, how did I get here? Because there was a time Orion used to hug me and say, "You're my hero, Mama." There was a time I believed a son's love was permanent. But that night, with my skin burning and my heart bleeding in front of strangers, I learned the most painful truth a mother can learn. Sometimes the person you love the most is the one who will destroy you without blinking. And after that phone call, what happened next, they will never forget. But before we get there, before I tell you what I did, and why they begged me for mercy later, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and write in the comments where you're watching from, because if you've ever been disappointed by someone you loved, I want to hear your story too. Now let me take you back to the beginning, back to the version of my life when I still believed love meant loyalty. THRERS 3 years ago my life was different, not perfect, but it was mine. I lived in a spacious apartment in the West End of Atlanta, with a balcony full of red geraniums and bougainvillea I watered every morning like they were my children too. I had routines. Strong coffee at 7, sweet potato pastries from Mr. Henderson's bakery. Then I opened my little tailoring shop downstairs. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't hungry either. And after Orion's father walked out when my son was 5, I learned a truth most women learn too late. A woman can build a whole life with her own 2 hands and never beg anyone to stay. I sewed wedding gowns, prom dresses, church blouses for women who wanted elegance without screaming for attention. My hands knew fabric the way a preacher knows scripture. Every stitch, every hem, every secret hidden under lace. Orion grew up watching that. He watched me wake up at 5 to finish orders. Watched me sew until my fingers bled. Watched me cry quietly over the old Singer machine my grandmother left me and still keep going. And he'd look up at me with those serious eyes and say, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm going to work so hard you never have to struggle again." And I believed him. Because Orion was always a good boy, responsible, polite, a little too charming for his own good, but still good. He got into Morehouse, graduated with honors, got a job at a major real estate firm, and when he started wearing suits I tailored myself, he'd come to my apartment on Sundays with flowers, kiss my forehead and say, "Everything I am is because of you." For years that was enough. Then he met Clementina, and everything changed. Cielmentimaya, the first time Orion said her name, I heard it in his voice. That new shine, that hunger, that tone a man gets when he thinks he's finally about to enter a world he's always dreamed about. "She's special, Mama." Clementina was the only daughter of a wealthy Buckhead family. Her father, Reginald, owned hardware stores. And her mother, Serafina. Serafina was the kind of woman who never worked a day in her life, yet spoke like she ran the world. When Orion said he wanted us to meet at a Buckhead restaurant, I wore my best dress. Pearl earrings. Hair neat. I wanted to make a good impression. Because that's what mothers do. We show up, we smile, we try. Clementina arrived in white, perfect from head to toe. Pretty, polite, but cold. Her smile didn't touch her eyes, and when she spoke to me, she said, "Miss Zenobia." Not Zenobia. Not Mom. Not Ms. Washington. Miss Zenobia, like my name needed permission to exist in her world. And then she said something that made my stomach twist. "My mother is anxious to meet you." The way she said it. Like a warning. Not a compliment. Orion squeezed my hand under the table like he could sense my discomfort, and I wanted to believe him. I really did, because when your child loves someone, you don't want to be the villain who questions it. So I swallowed that feeling. I smiled. And I told myself everything would be fine, but a cold voice inside me whispered, "This girl is not honest and her mother is worse. That is what you deserve." Those words still echo in my ears, not like a memory, like a bruise that never fully heals. A sound that refuses to fade even when the room is quiet, even when my hands are busy, even when the day tries to pretend it's ordinary. My name is Zenobia Washington. I am 59 years old. And this is the story I kept locked in silence for months until the silence itself became unbearable. That night at my son Orion's wedding reception, his new mother-in-law, Serafina, lifted a bowl of piping hot gumbo and threw it directly into my face. The first thing I felt was heat. Not warmth, heat. The kind that bites, that claws at your skin, that steals your breath. Spices burned my eyes. Thick broth slid down my cheeks and into the neckline of my ivory silk blouse, soaking the fabric like a stain that wanted to announce itself to the entire room. But what burned me more than the gumbo was her expression. Serafina didn't look shocked by her own behavior. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't even look angry. She looked satisfied. As if she had been waiting years for this moment. As if she had practiced it in her mind, rehearsed the weight of the bowl, the angle of her wrist, the way she would hold her chin after she did it, like a queen delivering punishment. And then she said it. Clear and steady, with that calm voice that makes cruelty feel official. "That is what you deserve." The banquet hall fell silent. Not the kind of silence where people are confused and asking questions. No, this was the kind of silence where everyone understands something ugly has just happened, and they decide, in the same breath, to protect themselves by looking away. Forks froze above plates. Glasses stopped clinking. Someone's chair scraped softly, like a nervous apology. And then nothing. No one moved. No one spoke. No one stood up and said, "Hey, what the hell is wrong with you?" No one, except my son Orion, my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father abandoned us. The child I fed with tired hands, the one I kept warm when the apartment heat went out. The boy whose school uniforms I stitched back together when seams split. Whose shoes I cleaned with a brush until they looked less secondhand. Whose future I carried in my bones. Orion sat at the head table, arms crossed, and said in a deep, flat voicey, "She's right, Mama." That sentence didn't just hurt. It changed something in me. I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. Like the entire room had become a stage built over emptiness, and my life was suddenly slipping through cracks I hadn't known were there. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't ask. Why? The way movies teach women to ask, as if an explanation would stitch a torn heart back together. I simply reached for the linen napkin on the nearest table, lifted it to my face and wiped slowly. My skin stung, my eyelashes clumped. The scent of seafood and cayenne filled my nose, but my hands did not shake. I stood up without making a sound. I walked toward the double doors with my back straight, even though inside every part of me was trembling. And before I left that building, before I stepped into the night air and let the city swallow me whole, I did something no one expected. I took my phone out of my clutch. I dialed a number I had saved weeks ago, and when the call connected, I said just 3 words, "It is time." Then I hung up. I closed the door softly behind me. No one followed. No one called my name. No one rushed into the hallway to ask if I was okay. That's the part that still gets me sometimes. Not the gumbo, not even Orion's words. The way the room let me leave like I was nothing. I got into my car, started the engine, and as I drove through the dark streets of Buckhead, past manicured lawns and glowing porch lights, and the kind of neighborhoods where even the air smells expensive, I felt one question turning in circles inside my head. How did I get here? Because there was a time Orion would hug me and say, "You're my hero, Mama." There was a time I believed a son's love was permanent. There was a time I thought loyalty was a natural thing, something that didn't need to be negotiated. But that night, with my face burning and my heart broken in front of strangers, I learned something I never thought I'd have to learn at nearly 60 years old. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who betray us the deepest, and sometimes silence becomes the only weapon you have left. Now, before we go further, make sure you're subscribed. Because what I'm about to share is not just messy. It's not just painful. It's the kind of story that makes you check your own life and wonder who you've been trusting. And write in the comments where you're listening from, because I want to know how far this story travels, and I want to hear from anyone who has ever been disappointed by someone they loved. Now let me take you back. Back to when my life still felt like mine. Back to before Serafina's smile became my nightmare. Back to the beginning. 3 years earlier, 3 years ago, my world wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I lived in a spacious apartment in the west end of Atlanta with a balcony full of red geraniums and bougainvillea that I watered every morning like they were part of my family. The building wasn't new. The elevator creaked. The hallway lights flickered sometimes. But my apartment had sunlight and it had peace. And most importantly, it had my routine. Strong coffee at 7. Sweet potato pastries from Mr. Henderson's bakery on the corner. Then I opened my little fine tailoring shop on the ground floor of the building, where the smell of fabric and steam and starch felt like home. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't starving either. After Orion's father left us, when my son was barely 5 years old, I learned something many women don't learn until they're forced into it. A woman can sustain an entire life with her own 2 hands without begging anyone for permission. I worked with fabric the way some people work with music. I sewed wedding gowns for girls who believed love was forever. Prom dresses for teenagers who wanted to feel seen. Sunday blouses for church women who wanted elegance without screaming about money. My hands knew every stitch, every hem, every secret a fabric keeps when you treat it with patience. Orion grew up seeing that. He saw me get up at 5 in the morning to finish an order. He saw me sew until my fingertips burned. He saw me cry quietly from exhaustion over the old Singer machine my grandmother left me, then wipe my tears and keep going. And when he was little, he'd sit on the floor with his toy cars and look up at me with those serious eyes and say, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm gonna work hard so you can rest." And I believed him, because Orion was always a good boy, responsible, affectionate, observant, the kind of child who didn't ask for much, but when he did, it mattered. On Sundays he helped me clean the shop. He'd hold fabric up to the light and ask why some materials looked cheap even when they were expensive. Because he was already learning what I had learned early. People spend money to hide insecurity. When he turned 18 and got into Morehouse College, I remember sitting on my balcony with my coffee, looking at the acceptance letter in my hands, and whispering into the air like a prayer, "Thank you." Every sacrifice felt worth it. I sued for wealthy families who would never invite me to their tables but paid well for my work. I took extra orders. I stayed up late. I drank coffee like it was oxygen. I saved every dollar because I wanted my son to finish college without owing anyone anything. And he did. Orion graduated with honors, got a job at a top real estate firm, and started wearing suits I tailored for him myself. And every Sunday for a while, he came by with flowers, kissed my forehead, and said, "Thank you, Mama. Everything I am is because of you." Those words were like sunlight. They made the years of struggle feel meaningful. And I thought, truly thought, that we had made it. Then Orion met Clementina. Clementina, the first time Orion spoke her name, I heard something in his voice that I hadn't heard before. Not just happiness. A kind of hunger. A shine in his eyes I couldn't name. "She's special, Mama," he said, and he smiled like a man who believes he has finally been chosen by life. Clementina was the only daughter of a wealthy Buckhead family. Her father, Reginald, owned a chain of hardware supply stores. And her mother, Serafina, was one of those women who had never worked a day in her life, but could give orders like a general. When Orion told me he wanted to introduce me to Clementina, I chose my outfit carefully. I wore my best navy, blue dress with discreet embroidery at the collar, the one I'd sewn for a cousin's wedding years ago. I pressed it myself. I pinned my hair neatly. I put on my mother's pearl earrings. I wasn't trying to compete. I was trying to show respect. Because when your son loves a woman, you don't walk in looking like you're bitter about it. You walk in hoping to build something new. Orion insisted we meet at a restaurant in Buckhead that I would never have chosen. Too elegant, too expensive, the kind of place where the water comes in a glass bottle and the waiter speaks softly like your hunger is a secret. But Orion wanted it. I want you two to get to know each other well. Mama, he said, Clementina is important to me. So I went. Clementina arrived in an impeccable white dress, clean lines, expensive fabric, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was pretty, but cold. We made small talk. Weather, work, traffic. The kind of conversation people have when they're trying to behave like adults while silently measuring each other. She told me she worked in interior design. She talked about wedding ideas, even though she and Orion had only been dating 6 months. And I smiled and nodded and asked questions like a mother trying her best. But then she said something that made my stomach tighten. My mother is anxious to meet you, Miss Zenobia. I've told her so much about you. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said Miss Zenobia. Like my name needed a label to be acceptable in her mouth. Orion squeezed my hand under the table, as if to reassure me. And I wanted to believe him, because back then, I still believed that the bond between a mother and her son, especially a mother who did it all alone, was unbreakable. I didn't know yet that some women decide you are their enemy before they ever meet you. And I didn't know yet that Serafina had already judged me from a distance. Judged my clothes, my neighborhood, my job, my hands. That afternoon when Orion drove me home, he said brightly, Clementina adores you, Mama. I smiled. But deep down, a small cold voice whispered, that girl is lying, and her mother will be worse. The dinner invitation 3 months later, they invited me to dinner at Serafina's house. That was when everything started to crack. Serafina's house in Buckhead was exactly as I imagined, massive, cold. Full of things nobody needs. Crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, oil paintings in gold frames, furniture that looked like it came straight out of a magazine. So perfect it felt like you could dirty it just by breathing. When Orion and I arrived, Serafina met us at the door with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Zenobia, she said, giving me 2 air kisses without touching my cheeks. How nice to see you. Come in, come in. Make yourself at home. But I didn't feel at home. I felt like a guest who wasn't wanted. Clementina floated down the staircase in pale pink, wearing a dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Miss Zenobia, she said again, that polite empty smile still in place. You look lovely, Miss Zenobia? Like a reminder. Serafina's husband, Reginald, was a large man with a raspy voice who barely shook my hand before returning to his armchair. He didn't say much all night, just grunted occasionally and poured himself scotch like it was medication. Orion looked comfortable in that house. Too comfortable. As if those walls belonged to his future more than my little apartment ever did. That hurt me more than I wanted to admit. Dinner was served by a young housekeeper who moved like a shadow, eyes down, voice barely audible. Serafina spoke to her without looking at her. More water. Bring the bread. I smiled gently at the girl when she placed my plate down. She gave me a quick look, almost grateful, then disappeared again. The conversation at dinner was tense from the start. Serafina talked about friends at the country club, vacations in Hilton Head, the new SUV Reginald bought. Because one can't just drive around in anything, right, Zenobia? She laughed lightly, like it was a joke we were both supposed to enjoy. I nodded, not sure what to say. Clementina rested her hand on Orion's arm in a possessive way that made my chest tighten. I told Orion, she said sweetly. When we get married, he needs to think about a bigger car. The one he has is modest. Orion laughed awkwardly. The car is fine, babe, but we're going to have children, Clementina insisted. We need space, safety. Besides, my dad can help with the down payment. I felt something twist inside me. My son bought that car with his own money. I remembered him calling me the day he got it, excited like a kid. Now it was being discussed like an embarrassment. I think Orion knows what's best for him, I said carefully, keeping my voice calm. Serafina looked at me for the first time all night, really looked at me like she was assessing my weight in the room. Of course, she said smoothly. Orion is very smart. That's why I'm sure he'll make the right decisions for his future. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly, for his new family. The way she said new family was like a slap you can't prove happened. Orion lowered his eyes to his plate. He said nothing. And in that moment, a terrible understanding settled into my stomachs. My son was letting them push me aside. Serafina went on like she was conducting a meeting. "And the wedding," she said brightly. "Clementina and I have already started looking at churches. Of course, it will be at the cathedral. That's where my parents married. My grandparents, our entire family." She spoke as if tradition was a crown only her family was allowed to wear. "The reception will be at the St. Regis," she continued. "Nothing too ostentatious. Just elegant. Things must be done properly, right?" I nodded. No one had asked what I thought. No one had asked what Orion wanted. It was like my son's wedding belonged to them. Then Serafina tilted her head and smiled, a gentle predator's smile. "And what do you think, Zenobia?" "It sounds beautiful," I said, forcing my voice steady. "The important thing is that Orion and Clementina are happy." "Exactly," she replied, lifting her wine glass. "Happy and starting well." Her gaze lingered on me, without burdens. That word hung in the air like poison. Burdens. Clementina excused herself to the restroom. Reginald sank deeper into his chair. And Serafina leaned toward me, voice low but sharp. "Zenobia," she said, "you seem like a reasonable woman, so I'm going to be direct." I held my posture. Orion is a good boy, but he's accustomed to a simple life, and that's fine. Her eyes bored into mine. But now he's joining our family. And our family has expectations. Expectations? I repeated quietly, feeling heat climb up my neck. "Yes," she said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. "Clementina needs stability, a husband who can provide. Orion needs to focus on his future, not on the past." "The past," I whispered. She waved a hand lightly as if I was just a detail. "Don't misunderstand me. I admire that you did so much for your son, truly. But now it's time for him to fly alone." She leaned in closer. "Without strings. Without emotional dependencies." My throat tightened. "I have never been a burden to my son," I said, voice trembling but firm. "Of course not," she replied. "But a good mother knows when to step aside." That sentence went straight through me. And then Clementina returned, smiling, and Orion started talking again like nothing happened. Dessert arrived. Crème broilée. I didn't taste a bite. When dinner ended, Serafina handed me a small box. "A little detail," she said sweetly. "So you think of us." Inside was a fine china teacup, white with gold rims. Expensive. Cold. I thanked her, but I understood it wasn't a gift, it was a message. "You don't belong here." The ride home, on the drive back to my apartment, Orion was quiet. So was I. Finally, as we pulled up in front of my building, he asked, "Did you like Serafina, Mama?" I looked at him. Really looked at him, searching for the boy who used to call me his hero, but his eyes were somewhere else, somewhere far away. "She seems strong," I said carefully. Orion smiled. "She's incredible. She and Clementina are so close. It's nice to see." I wanted to ask, "And what about us? What about me? What about the life we built?" But I said nothing. I kissed his cheek, got out of the car, and walked up the stairs to my apartment alone. That night, I brewed coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the china teacup Serafina gave me. It was beautiful, perfect, and somehow it made me feel smaller. I poured coffee into it, raised it to my lips, and I couldn't drink, because it didn't taste like comfort. It tasted like control. I set it down untouched and grabbed my old stoneware mug, the one I'd used for years, the one with the chipped rim, the one that knew the taste of my life. And as I drank my coffee in silence, a question began to grow inside me like a dark seed. How far will this woman go to push me out of my son's life? I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. Soon, because sometimes the first crack is quiet, and you only realize later it was the beginning of the collapse. The slow erasing of a mother. The first thing I noticed wasn't cruelty. It was absence. Not sudden, not dramatic, just quiet. Like a light being dimmed so slowly you don't realize you're standing in the dark until you trip over something that used to be familiar. After that dinner at Serafina's house, Orion didn't stop loving me overnight. He just started disappearing in pieces. Sundays tate vanished for years. Sundays belonged to us. He'd show up late morning with pastries, sometimes flowers. We'd eat together, talk about his work, laugh about small things. He'd help me move furniture so I could sweep underneath. He'd complain about clients. I'd complain about my back. It was ordinary, and it was sacred. Then the Sundays started changing. The first Sunday he didn't come, he called instead. "Sorry, Mama. Clementina's parents invited us to lunch." "Of course, baby," I said. "Have a good time." The second Sunday it was a brunch at the country club. The third, a family gathering. Then a wedding planning meeting. Then nothing. Weeks passed. When he did come, it felt rushed. He checked his phone. He smiled without listening. He hugged me with one arm like someone hugging a colleague, and every time he left, my apartment felt a little emptier than before. Mrs. Zenobia. The words followed me everywhere. Miss Zenobia. Not said with warmth. Not said with respect. Said like a label you stick on a box you don't want to open. It was Clementina who used it most. Miss Zenobia, Serafina thinks it would be better if. Miss Zenobia, we already decided. Miss Zenobia, you understand, right? Every sentence felt like a reminder you are tolerated. You are not included. You are temporary. I told myself not to be sensitive. I told myself this was normal when a son starts a new life. I told myself I was being dramatic. But my body knew better. My chest tightened every time Orion canceled plans. My hands shook every time my phone stayed silent too long. My sleep grew shallow. Something was wrong. TGSHOP. Then came the call that gave me hope. Clementina wants you to come dress shopping with us, Orion said one afternoon. My heart jumped. Really? She says you're an expert with fabrics. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe Clementina wanted to build a bridge. Maybe Serafina wasn't as hostile as she seemed. Hope can be dangerous like that. The boutique was in Buckhead. White walls, velvet sofas, dresses lined the walls like ghosts of expensive dreams. I arrived early, dressed neatly, purse in hand. Clementina arrived late. With Serafina and 3 friends who looked at me like I was part of the DA Corps. I sat quietly on a velvet sofa as Clementina tried on dress after dress. Everyone clapped. Serafina barked orders at the assistant. The friends took photos. No one asked me anything, until Clementina stepped out in a strapless lace gown with a long train. She twirled. What do you think, Miss Zenobia? The room went quiet. I took a breath. It's beautiful, I said honestly. But I think a dress with delicate sleeves would highlight your shoulders better. The silence turned cold. Serafina smiled without humor. Well, Clementina said lightly, that style is very traditional. I don't know if you're very up to date with trends. Her friends laughed softly. Serafina stood and placed her hand on Clementina's shoulder. You look perfect, darling. This is the one. They bought it, just like that. And I understood something important. I wasn't invited for my opinion. I was invited to be ignored. Outside, Orion waited. How'd it go, Mama? It's lovely, I said. He nodded, satisfied. Then Serafina took his arm. We're going to lunch to finalize details, she said. You don't mind if Zenobia rests, do you? He didn't look at me. Yeah, Mama, you must be tired. And just like that, they left me standing on the sidewalk, alone. Timanuai. The next invitation came weeks later. Dinner. Just the 2 of us, Orion said. I dressed carefully. Burgundy dress. Simple. Clean. But when I arrived, Clementina was already seated. Throughout dinner, she talked about the honeymoon, the condo, the lifestyle. And then, when the check came, Orion said casually, Mama, can you lend me 2,000 Wedding expenses are heavy. I didn't have 2,000 to spare, but I gave it to him anyway. Because that's what mothers do. He never paid it back, and I never asked. Because that night something painful became clear. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was his backup plan. THEINVIDONS TEHAT EMIR CAM. I wasn't invited to the bachelor party. I wasn't invited to the rehearsal dinner. I found out through social media, through strangers' photos, through silence. When I asked Orion, he looked uncomfortable. Oh, Mama, last-minute things. We didn't want to bother me. Like my presence was an inconvenience. THENVLOP. It arrived on a Tuesday. A slow day at the shop. A delivery man handed me a manila envelope. No return address. Just my name. Inside were photographs. Orion with Serafina, too close, too intimate, leaving hotels. Touching, smiling the way lovers do. My knees gave out. The world tilted. I threw up in the bathroom. And when I returned to the shop, something inside me had changed. The pain was still there. But now there was something else too. Clarity. Cold. Sharp. Unavoidable. I wasn't being pushed out because I was poor. I was being pushed out because I was in the way. And Serafina wasn't protecting her daughter. She was protecting herself. Tichi de Kisana. And I sat at my sewing machine, staring at the black thread hanging from the needle. And I knew something with terrifying certainty. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a trap, and if I stayed silent, someone innocent would be destroyed. I took out my phone, and I made the call that would change everything. The truth beneath the silence, I didn't cry after I saw the photographs. That part surprises people when I tell them. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse again. I didn't call anyone. I sat very still, because there is a moment when shock finishes its work, where emotion drains out of you and all that's left is clarity, cold, sharp, unforgiving. The photographs lay scattered on the chair beside my sewing machine like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. My son and Serafina, too close, too intimate, too deliberate. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't kindness misread. This was betrayal with intent. TSFT, I gathered the photographs slowly, one by one. My hands didn't shake anymore. That's how I knew something inside me had changed. I placed them back into the manila envelope and slid it into my purse. Then I turned off the shop lights, locked the door, and went upstairs to my apartment. I didn't brew coffee. I didn't turn on the television. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark and let the truth settle into my bones. Every strange moment suddenly made sense. Serafina's hostility, her obsession with pushing me away, the money, the control, Orion's guilt, his distance. She wasn't competing with me socially. She was competing with me emotionally. And I was winning without even knowing there was a contest. That's why she hated me. Badon, I understood something terrifying. This wedding had nothing to do with love. Clementina was not the center of the story, she was the cover. And Orion was not just weak, he was compromised. I watched the sun rise over the rooftops of Atlanta, and for the first time in my life, I looked at my son not as a child who needed protection, but as a man capable of destroying lives. That includes his own. Tichi Nam, I had Sav months earlier, a woman came into my shop to have a gala dress altered. She was quiet, nervous. Her hands trembled when she handed me the fabric. While I pinned the hem, she told me her husband had been lying to her for years, that she finally hired someone to confirm it. A private investigator, she whispered, like it was a crime. I remembered the name she gave me. I remembered saving it in my phone without knowing why. Now I knew. I didn't call right away. I needed to be sure of one thing first. I needed to know whether I was looking at an affair or something far worse. Booker Hajek says we met in a coffee shop in Decatur, neutral ground. Booker Hughes was ordinary looking, middle-aged, glasses, calm voice. The kind of man who doesn't try to impress you because he knows he doesn't have to. He didn't rush me. He didn't interrupt, he listened. When I slid the envelope across the table, he didn't react, just nodded. These are real, he said after a moment. But they're not enough. No, for what? I asked. To understand why this is happening. His eyes held mine, and to protect whoever needs protecting. The Fars Tindiangias. 2 days later, Booker called me. Miss Washington, he said, you need to sit down. I was already sitting, but my heart started racing anyway. He met me again, this time with a folder. Thick, heavy, the kind of folder that doesn't exist unless someone has been living a lie. Inside were hotel records, bank transfers, photographs taken from distances far enough to deny consent, but close enough to destroy denial. Orion and Serafina didn't just meet occasionally. They had an apartment, midtown, paid for by a shell company. Funded by Serafina. She's paying him, Booker said carefully. The words punched the air out of my lungs. Paying him for what? Booker didn't answer immediately. He slid another page forward. Large transfers. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. Regular, consistent, calculated. He's not just sleeping with her, Booker said. Dependent a la fakey. Then Booker dropped the next truth. Reginald's hardware empire. A lie. Loans stacked on loans. Mortgages layered on mortgages. Businesses hemorrhaging money. They're bankrupt, Booker said, barely holding it together. And Clementina? I asked, my voice barely audible. Booker hesitated. Her inheritance is real. I closed my eyes. Of course it was. Her grandmother left her millions? He continued. But the trust has conditions. What kind of conditions? Marriage. The word echoed like a gunshot. And if she dies while married, Booker added quietly, the money goes to her spouse. My son. There's one more thing, Booker said. He pulled out a small device. I need you to understand something before you hear this, he said. Once you do, there's no going back. I nodded. He pressed play. Orion's voice filled the space between us. What if Clementina finds out? Serafina's reply was smooth, calm, intimate. She won't. She sees what she wants to see. A pause. Then Orion again hesitant. But after the wedding, how do we continue this? A soft laugh. Accidents happen. My love. My heart stopped. You marry her, Serafina continued. Wait a year, maybe 2. And then we're free. Silence. Then my son's voice. Okay. A booker stopped the recording. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stared at the table like the world had just been rewritten in a language I never wanted to learn. "THESHOIC? You can go to the police," Booker said. "This is enough." I shook my head slowly. "If I do that," I said, "my son goes to prison. And if you don't," he replied gently, "an innocent girl could die." I closed my eyes. I thought of Clementina's smile, of how young she looked walking down the cathedral aisle, of how completely unaware she was. "I need time," I said. Booker nodded. "But understand this," he said before leaving. "This wedding isn't the end. It's the moment everything collapses." THEOCHURARKL. That night I didn't sleep. I walked my apartment, touched the walls, the furniture, the life I had built. Then I took out my wallet, and I looked at a business card I'd kept for months. Cornelius Estrada, Clementina's grandfather, a man who once told me, "People who work with their hands have souls." I had shown him everything. And when he finished reading, he didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't cry. He just said, "My granddaughter is in danger." "Yes," I replied. "And so is my son." Cornelius looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I will handle this. Tach Plata, you go to the wedding," Cornelius told me. "You behave normally, and when they reveal themselves, when they cross the line, you call me." And then I asked. "And then," he said quietly, "the truth does what it always does." Muay Thai. The next 2 weeks were torture. Orion barely called. When he did, his voice was empty. Clementina sent messages about seating arrangements. Serafina ignored me completely. I sued in silence. Waited, watched. Because sometimes the strongest move is not confrontation, it's patience. Teaching HTB for the night before the wedding, I sat alone in my apartment. I laid out my navy blue dress, polished my shoes, placed my mother's pearl earrings beside the mirror. I wasn't going to look small. I wasn't going to look angry. I was going to look unmovable. Because tomorrow everything would burn. The wedding that was never meant to last. The morning of the wedding arrived quietly. Too quietly. Atlanta woke up as it always did. Traffic humming, birds settling on power lines, coffee shops opening their doors. But for me, the world felt suspended, as if it were holding its breath. I stood in front of my mirror for a long time, not adjusting my dress, not fixing my hair, just looking at a woman who had given everything, at a mother who had been pushed aside, at someone who knew the truth and had chosen to wait. I put on my navy blue dress, the simple one I'd sewn years ago. No sequins, no drama, just clean lines and dignity. I pinned my hair into a neat bun and fastened my mother's pearl earrings. They were warm against my skin, grounding. I whispered to my reflection, "Whatever happens today, you will not beg. You will not break." The cathedral was breathtaking. White roses lined the aisle. Soft music echoed off stone walls. Candles flickered like promises. Over 200 guests filled the pews, wealthy, polished, confident people who believed they were attending the beginning of a fairy tale. I was seated in the 5th row. Not the front. Not beside family. Just far enough to remind me where I stood now. On the groom's side, there were only 3 of us. Me, a distant aunt. A cousin who barely remembered Orion as a child. That was all that remained of the family that had once been everything to him. When Orion walked down the aisle, my chest tightened. He looked handsome. Too handsome. The suit fit perfectly. His hair was groomed, his posture straight. For a fleeting second, just one, I saw the boy who used to run into my arms after school, and I almost stood up. Almost. Then I saw Serafina. She sat in the front row, draped in champagne silk, jewelry catching the candlelight, and when Orion passed her, she lifted her eyes. They locked. The look she gave him was not maternal. It was possessive, and Orion answered it, with a smile meant only for her. That was the moment my doubt died completely. And when Clementina entered, the entire church sighed. She was radiant, young, hopeful, completely unaware. The strapless dress she had chosen clung to her frame. Her face glowed with belief, with the certainty that she was stepping into safety. I felt a strange ache in my chest. Not jealousy, grief, because innocence never knows when it's being led to the edge. Tiachivas, the priest spoke of love, of trust, of fidelity. Every word landed like a quiet lie. Orion took Clementina's hands. "I promise to love and respect you," he said clearly. "To build a future based on truth, a truth." I pressed my fingernails into my palm until I felt pain. Clementina cried softly, nodding through her vows. Serafina smiled, satisfied. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Everyone stood. Everyone except me. I remained seated, still as stone, because I knew this marriage had already ended. Teach Wien, the St. Regis ballroom, was everything Serafina wanted. Crystal chandeliers, white linen live orchestra. I was placed at a table near the back, far from the head table, far from my son. Invisible again. And yet, I saw everything. Serafina directing waiters with a flick of her wrist. Orion watching her when Clementina wasn't looking. Clementina laughing, trusting, leaning into a happiness built on sand. I waited. Tichi danci when the time came for the mother-son dance. Orion approached my table. "Mama," he said, extending his hand. His smile was rehearsed. I took his hand. The music began, soft, sentimental. We moved in slow circles. "You look beautiful," he said without meeting my eyes. "So do you," I replied. "You look like a man who got everything he wanted." He stiffened. "Are you happy, Orion?" I asked quietly. "Less?" he said too quickly. "Very. And Serafina," I continued, lowering my voice. "Is she happy too?" His grip tightened. "This isn't the time," he hissed. "When will it be the time?" I asked. "After Clementina's inheritance clears. After something happens to her." He stopped moving. The music kept playing. "What did you just say?" he whispered. "I know everything," I said calmly. "The apartment, the money, the plan." His face drained of color. "You're imagining things." "I heard your voice," I said. I heard hers. People were staring now. Clementina noticed. She rushed over, panic in her eyes. "What's happening?" Before I could answer, Serafina stepped between us. "Zenobia," she said sharply. "You're embarrassing yourself. That's when it happened." She grabbed a bowl of gumbo from a passing tray, hot, steaming, and threw it directly into my face. The pain was immediate, burning, blinding. Gas filled the room. Serafina stood there calm, smiling. "That is what you deserve," she said clearly. Silence. Then Orion crossed his arms. "She's right, Mama." At THECal, I wiped my face with a napkin. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I took out my phone, dialed the number I had memorized, and said 3 words. "It is time." Then I walked out.